So a couple of quick announcements before we get to the presentation. First of all, a thank you to the James Irvine Foundation. This event is part of the James Irvine Foundation briefing series, so they helped us with the lunch and our ability to hold this and a lot of other policy briefings that we do over lunch here in Sacramento. And a couple of announcements about some upcoming events we have. On September 30th, coming up in this room, we'll have a presentation on a report called Child Poverty and Social Safety Net in California from two of our researchers, Sarah Bone and Carol Danielson, who will be presenting on that topic. And then on October 6th, we have at the Sheraton Hotel here in Sacramento, we'll have it's fairly big, I think it's almost full right now, an event with the two new leaders in the state legislature, Speaker Tony Atkins and the Senate President-elect Kevin De Leon are going to be on stage with PPIC President Mark Baldessari to talk about, the institution and some of the stuff we see coming up next year in their first year as full year as leaders. And a couple other quick things. There's an evaluation form on your chairs, and if you wanted to fill it out before you leave and drop it off on the table on the way out, tell us how you think we did. That would be very much appreciated. We're also taping this for broadcast, so if you want to silence your cell phone, you might avoid an embarrassing moment. And also the slides that you'll be seeing today are going to be on our website, as is the survey, of course, and there's a version of the survey on your chairs, but this website also, just so you know, has the ability to do your own crosstab searches on some of these questions. So if you want to find out different demographic takes on some of the questions in the polls, you can actually do it all online pretty easily. So, so with that, I'm going to introduce Dean Bonner, who's going to present our survey today. He's a member of our statewide survey team, a research associate who is managing this poll we're going to hear about today. So please welcome Dean Bonner.
Great turnout today. It must be the food, I'm guessing. So I would echo what Dave said about the interactive crosstab tools on our website. It goes back quite a bit right now, so if you're curious about how something looks over time, previous elections, that's a great tool where you can do it yourself, or feel free to contact us as well. So prior to discussing this month's survey, let's talk a little bit about the statewide survey more generally. Our mission is to provide timely, relevant, and nonpartisan data on social, political, and economic opinions that we hope inform and improve state policy making, raise awareness, and encourage discussion. We're in our 16th year, and we have completed over 130 surveys, and recently we've crossed over 300,000 Californians that we've interviewed. This particular survey, as well as Dave said, the briefing series is funded by the James Irvine Foundation. And in this survey, we look at the November 2014 election. That includes the gubernatorial race, as well as 4 of the propositions that are on the state ballot. We also look at some state and national issues, including the state budget, the initiative process, healthcare reform, and immigration at the national level, as well as water policy. So this survey, we interviewed just over 1,700 Californians, just over 900 of who we deem to be likely to vote in November. And interviews took place 2 weeks ago from September 8th to the 15th. And as you can see, the margin of error for all adults is 3.6, and the margin of error for likely voters is at 4.9%. Alrighty, so let's get into some of this interesting stuff. So our September survey marks the second time we've asked about the gubernatorial race since the field has been set after the June primary. As you can see, since July and in the wake of the one and only debate that will take place, the race is essentially unchanged. One potential reason for this is the fact that only about 1 in 10 likely voters say they're paying very close attention to news about candidates. Overall, just about half say they're paying very or fairly close attention to news about candidates. To put this in context, in September 2010, 81% of likely voters said they were following news very or fairly closely. In the last election with an incumbent, 2006, that number was 74%. So there definitely is a much lower attention to news at this point than there was at this point 4 or 8 years ago. So that may explain why there's, hasn't been a whole lot of movement on that front. So today, as you might expect, nearly 9 in 10 Democrats support Governor Brown, 2 in 3 Republicans support Neel Kashkari, and independents are more likely to support Brown than Kashkari, but 1 in 5 are still undecided. This points to a really big gap between partisan support for their own candidates. And when we look across region, Governor Brown has majority support in the San Francisco Bay Area and Los Angeles, as well as support of half of voters in the Central Valley. Neel Kashkari has majority support only in Orange, San Diego counties, and opinion in the Inland Empire is divided. After holding similar opinions in July, today we have a gender gap with women 10 points more likely than men to support Governor Brown. When we look at race, we find that 3 in 4 Latino likely voters support Governor Brown, while he has the support of just over 4 in 10 likely voters. Just as a methodological note, in the front half of this presentation, we're only going to be talking about Latinos and whites because of the smaller sample size among likely voters. Then once we get into the back half of the survey, we can also talk about Asians and African Americans as well. So while likely voters are not paying close attention to news about candidates as they did in 2010, they're more likely today to be satisfied, with 55% saying they're satisfied with their choices of candidates. That number was 45% in 2010. Satisfaction is much higher among Democrats and among those who support Governor Brown than among Republicans and those who support Neel Kashkari. And just about half of independents say that they're satisfied with their choices in this election. So in the wake of the 2012 election, there was much discussion about what a Democratic supermajority would mean for California. In the months that followed, that point became moot because of a few legal encounters with some Democratic state senators, and Democrats lost their 2/3 majority. As we prepare to go to the polls in November, it's being discussed that there's the potential for enough gains to where Democrats would regain their supermajority. So we wanted to follow this up and ask how Californians and likely voters felt about this. As you can see, likely voters are divided on this issue. They're slightly more likely to say it would be a bad thing than a good thing, and with Democrats more likely to say that it would be a good thing, and Republicans more likely to say it would be a bad thing. Independents are evenly divided between it being a bad thing and it making no difference. In the wake of the 2012 election, we asked a similar question, and we found that Californians were also divided then, and also that there was similar partisan support there as well. However, while they may be divided on the outcome of a supermajority in California, when it comes to Congress, half of likely voters say that they would prefer a Congress controlled by Democrats, while 4 in 10 say they would prefer a Congress controlled by Republicans. About half of Californians have preferred Democratic control in 2012 and in the lead up to the 2006 election. However, in October 2010, voters were evenly divided. As you recall, there was a big wave of conservative support for Tea Party and other Republican candidates at that time as well. As you might expect, there's overwhelming majorities in Democrats and Republicans would prefer that their own party control Congress. Independents are evenly divided on this issue, as you might expect as well. 2 in 3 Latino likely voters prefer Democratic control, while half of white likely voters do. And in a recent NBC Wall Street Journal poll, registered voters nationwide were divided on this issue, as they are on many other issues nationwide. So looking at some ballot propositions, we chose 4 ballot propositions to look at this time, beginning with Proposition 1. So after being pulled from the 2010 and 2012 ballots, the much debated state water bond was negotiated and passed earlier this summer and placed on the ballot. It's scaled down from the $11.1 billion that was originally passed, and today's water bond is $7.5 billion. And when we read the ballot title and label, 58% of likely voters say they would vote yes, 29% would vote no, and 14% are undecided. Majorities of Democratic and Independent likely voters are in support, while fewer than half of Republicans would vote yes, but 20% are still undecided. Proposition 1 has majority support across regions as well as all demographic groups. And not surprisingly, support is far higher among those who consider their regional water supply a big problem than those who say it's not much of a problem. On each of these questions, we also asked about how important voters thought the outcome of the proposition was. And this kind of, in some ways, gets at how enthusiastic or how important people think this actual topic is. And when we look at that, half of likely voters considered it to be very important, with supporters of with those who would vote yes on Proposition 1 much more likely than those who would vote no to call it very important. Another initiative placed on the ballot, or a constitutional amendment, I should say, placed on the ballot by the governor and legislature is Proposition 2. This was also at one point in time slated for the 2012 ballot. Today, when read the ballot title and label, 43% of likely voters would vote yes, 33% would vote no, and 24% are undecided. Fewer than half across parties say they would vote yes, and support across regions fails to eclipse 50% in any region. In fact, Proposition 2 fails to garner majority support or majority opposition across all demographic groups. Interestingly, when we've asked in the past more generally about either just a straight rainy day fund, or earlier this year when we were asking about components of this rainy day fund, some of the same components that are on the ballot title and label, there was much higher support for the idea of a rainy day fund. So as the election approaches, we'll have to follow this back up to see, as voters familiarize themselves, if this is something that they may become more supportive of, which is often not the case in ballot initiative campaigns. So Proposition 45 seeks to require the approval of the insurance commissioner before changes can occur to any health care rates or charges associated with health insurance. Just 48% of likely voters would vote yes on this, 38% would vote no, and 14% are undecided. Democrats and independents are more likely to support than oppose this initiative, while Republicans are more likely to be in opposition. Support is higher among lower income and Latino likely voters than among more affluent and white voters. And among those who view the 2010 health reform law, also known as Obamacare, favorably, 60% would vote yes. Among those who view that law unfavorably, half would vote no. And so that's definitely having an impact on this proposition. When asked about the importance of this, we find that 4 in 10 likely voters say it is very important. Another 36% say the outcome is somewhat important. And yes voters on Proposition 45 are more likely than no voters to say that the outcome of this proposition is very important. So we also asked about Proposition 47. This would require a misdemeanor sentence instead of a felony for certain drug and property crimes, and it would be inapplicable to sex offenders and persons with prior convictions for serious or violent crimes. When read the ballot title and label, 62% of likely voters would vote yes, 25% would vote no, and 13% are undecided. There's majority support across parties, regions, and demographic groups, with Democrats, Latinos, lower income likely voters, and those in the Inland Empire amongst the more supportive of this proposition. Regarding the importance of the outcome on Proposition 47, 4 in 10 view it as very important, and another 38% say it is somewhat important. And once again, yes voters are more likely than no voters to view the outcome of this proposition as very important. So at this point, we'll turn to some state and national issues. And Governor Brown's approval today continues to hover around 50% as he prepares for a November election. The lone exception as of late has been when he reached a record high 58% in January of 2014. Looking at a longer term trend, about 4 in 10 approved of his performance throughout most of 2012 and most of 2011. When we turn to the legislature, we see the approval, that the legislature has the approval of just fewer than 4 in 10 Californians, which is in line with approval for the last year. Approval of the legislature today is higher than it was in 2012 and much higher than ratings they received from 2009 to 2011 when they were most of the time below 30% during that time period. When we ask our questions about overall mood, one of which is what the most important issue to the state today, we find that most people, or about 4 in 10, continue to say that jobs in the economy are the most important issue, but today we find that about 1 in 4 say that water or the drought is the most important issue. This is up from 2% that were saying this last September. And so that's definitely having an impact also on Proposition 1, as well as their overall views on water policy. When we look at the mood of the state, we find that while the mood has improved, fewer than half still say that the state is heading in the right direction or that they expect good economic times. However, this is a big change from 2 years ago when 1 in 3 said the state was headed in the right direction or expected good economic times. Looking back further than that, fewer than 4 in 10 have held these positive perceptions from 2008 to 2012 during the Great Recession. And in fact, positive perceptions didn't eclipse 30% from 2008 all the way to 2011. So while we're in a much better place, as you can see, it's still fewer than half expecting that things are going to go in the right direction or expect good economic times. So even as the economy and the fiscal situation has improved, half of Californians still view the budget situation as a big problem, and another 3 in 10 view it as somewhat of a problem. At least half of Californians have called the budget situation a big problem in periodic surveys dating back to January 2008. And while pessimism is still high, it has been below 60% since last September and has declined a bit from levels reached during the height of the budget crisis when more than 7 in 10 Californians were saying the budget situation is a big problem. Today, Republicans, as you can see, are much more likely than Democrats or independents to say that the budget situation is a big problem. In a separate question, we also asked about the need for change in the budget process. And we found that about half of Californians said the budget process was in need of major changes. That includes 8 in 10 Republicans who say that, compared to just half of independents and 4 in 10 Democrats who say it's in need of changes. So on the larger question, which often divides voters across parties, we find that Californians are evenly divided regarding the size of government, with just under half saying that they would prefer higher taxes and more services, and just under half saying they would prefer fewer taxes and less services. As one might expect, 6 in 10 Democrats prefer higher taxes and more services, while 3 in 4 Republicans would prefer lower taxes and fewer services. Just over half of independents fall on the side of lower taxes and fewer services. We also find that majorities of Latinos and blacks prefer a government with higher taxes and more services, while about half of Asians and whites prefer lower taxes and fewer services. And this is a question where today we see that just over half of likely voters fall on the side of fewer taxes and lower taxes and fewer services, which is somewhat consistent from the past, but today is especially high for them. So this November, as is often the case, voters will be asked to make decisions about fiscal matters at the ballot box. When asked who should make the tough choices when it comes to the state budget, most Californians, partisans, and likely voters say that voters should make some of the decisions rather than have the governor and the legislature make all of the decisions. This finding is consistent with past surveys dating back to 2011, where at least 3 in 4 have preferred that voters be involved in the budget process. This belief is widely held today, with more than 7 in 10 across age, income, racial, ethnic, and regional groups saying that voters should have a say. This is consistent with overall findings also regarding the initiative process and Californians definitely wanting a say when it comes to some of these tough decisions. And so while many Californians say that they should have a say and say that they are satisfied with the initiative process, often 55% say that the initiative process is controlled a lot by special interest, and another third say that special interest controls it at least some. The view that special interest has a lot of control over the initiative process has been held by majorities in periodic surveys dating back to 2001. And today, likely voters are even more likely than adults to say that special interest has a lot of control over the initiative process. Majorities across parties hold this view, and this view is widely held across the state, with at least half across regions saying that special interest has a lot of control. And I'm sure as we're all preparing for the election, some of these special interests will be viewed on our TV screen as we hopefully, have a DVR where we can potentially skip the bombardment depending on where you live. So with California in the midst of a severe drought, it's not surprising that the share of Californians calling the supply of water in their part of California a big problem has continued to rise. At least 6 in 10 across regions say their water supply is a big problem. And while more than 6 in 10 inland and coastal residents say it's a big problem, inland residents are more likely than coastal residents to hold this view. The view that water supply is a big problem is held by majorities across parties and demographic groups, and it's increased 11 points among likely voters since July. It's increased 10 points since March among all Californians, as you can see. And once again, attitudes towards water policy and towards the drought are going to be impacting the vote on Proposition 1, and so that's something to definitely keep an eye on as we move forward. So as the drought has worsened, we've seen local water districts take a variety of measures to deal with the drought on their own. And when we asked about a hypothetical local water district bond measure to pay for water supply infrastructure projects, we find 7 in 10 Californians, including strong majorities across regions, and 2 in 3 likely voters say that they would vote yes on this type of measure. That's a little bit higher than the 58% of likely voters who would vote yes on Proposition 1. And while majorities across parties would vote yes, Democrats are more likely than independents and Republicans to hold this view. Among those who would vote yes on Proposition 1, 87% say they would also vote yes on a local bond measure. Among those who would vote no on Proposition 1, half of likely voters would vote no on a local measure. So moving on from the state government to the federal government, we find that today President Obama's approval rating is at 48%, and that's a new record low. That's similar to record lows of 50% in July and 51% in May. And so while the line looks somewhat straight, that is a consistent decline over the last few months. There's a wide partisan divide when it comes to approval of President Obama, with 7 in 10 Democrats and 8 in 10 Republicans. 7 in 10 Democrats approving and 8 in 10 Republicans disapproving. We've seen a somewhat of a decline among Democrats who are approving, and an increase among Republicans who are disapproving over the last few months as well. Half or more Blacks, Asians, and Latinos approve of President Obama, while 6 in 10 whites disapprove. Approval of Congress has rebounded slightly from its record low in March and is currently at 24%. There is rare bipartisan agreement, and that's on the disapproval of Congress, with more than 7 in 10 Republicans, Democrats, and independents disapproving of their job performance. On the president and on approval of the president and Congress, while Californians are at near low points, they're more approving than our brethren nationwide in recent national polls. We wanted to ask about our 2 California senators this month, and we find that approval of both Senators Dianne Feinstein and Barbara Boxer is below 50%, with about 1 in 5 unsure of how they would rate each of those. 55% of voters approve of Senator Feinstein, while 45% approve of Senator Boxer's. For both senators, more than 2 in 3 Democrats approve, more than 6 in 10 Republicans disapprove, and fewer than half of independents approve. So turning to one of the more antagonistic issues at the federal level, the 2010 healthcare law, we find that Californians continue to be divided, as they have been since we first asked this question in December 2013. 6 in 10 Democrats view the law favorably. 8 in 10 Republicans have unfavorable opinions. Among those who remain uninsured at this time, about half view the law unfavorably, while those who are insured currently are divided. Across regions, only in the San Francisco Bay Area do we find a majority viewing the law favorably. Adults nationwide in a Kaiser Family Foundation poll recently viewed the law even less favorably than Californians in our survey. However, despite the contentious nature of the health reform law, nearly 6 in 10 Californians, including majorities across parties, say the health reform law had no direct impact on themselves or their family. 1 in 5 say it has directly helped their family or themselves, and another 1 in 5 say it has directly hurt them. Across party, more Democrats say the law has helped them, while Republicans say the law has hurt them. Californians with household incomes less than $40,000 are more likely than those with higher incomes to say the law helped them. About 1 in 4 Latinos and Blacks say they were helped by the law, while about 1 in 5 Asians and 1 in 7 whites hold this view. So we also asked follow-up questions on those who said the law hurt them and those who said the law helped them. Of the 1 in 5 Californians who say that they were helped by the law, 31% say that it allowed them or someone in their family to get or keep coverage. 1 in 4 say that the law made it easier to get health insurance. And 1 in 5 say that it lowered their health care cost. Of the 1 in 5 who say the law has hurt them, more than half said that it led to increased cost. That's 55%, while 1 in 5 said it made it more difficult to get health care. So despite the very contentious nature, we see that nearly 6 in 10 of Californians and also adults nationwide say that it's had no direct impact, although there are some definite real reasons why people feel that way when we look at either helping get coverage or the feeling that it's hurt their ability to get coverage or raised their rates or lowered their rates depending. Turning to another issue that's garnered a lot of attention as of late, immigration. Californians continue to view immigrants as a benefit because of their hard work and job skills, rather than a burden because they use public service. This is one of our more consistent findings over time, as you can see. And just a few months ago, it was at a record high 65%. As with many other national issues, there's a wide partisan divide. 6 in 10 Democrats view immigrants as a benefit. 6 in 10 Republicans view immigrants as a burden. In this case, independents fall on the side of as viewing immigrants as a benefit. Strong majorities of Latinos and Asians view immigrants as a benefit, while fewer than half of blacks and whites hold this view. Solid majorities of Californians age 18 to 55 view immigrants as a benefit, while fewer than half of those 55 and older hold this view. So we also wanted to get at the idea of some concrete policies ideas. And so the first thing we asked about was what people's priorities were for immigration policy. Californians are divided on what should be the higher priority right now. 41% say securing the border, while 46% say address the current status of illegal immigrants currently in the country. Last September, findings were similar, with 41% saying securing the border and 51% saying addressing the status of current illegal immigrants. Once again, there's a wide partisan divide, with half of Democrats saying they should address the status of current illegal immigrants and 7 in 10 Republicans prioritizing securing the border. Independents are evenly divided on this issue. When we look at the racial ethnic groups, Latinos are the only racial ethnic groups that prioritize the status of current illegal immigrants, while just over half of blacks and whites prioritize securing the border, and Asians are divided on this issue. As you can see by the chart, Californians place much different priorities than adults nationwide, according to an August CBS News poll, where nearly 6 in 10 prioritized securing the border. In a separate question, we also asked about the idea of providing a path to citizenship for illegal immigrants currently in the country if they met certain requirements, including a waiting period, paying fines, and back taxes, passing criminal background checks, and learning English. This is similar to what the blueprint was for the reform bill that passed the Senate. And today we find that 8 in 10 Californians favor that, while 17% oppose this idea. And this is consistent with findings we've seen on this since we started asking this question about a year ago. So in conclusion, Governor Brown still leads in a gubernatorial election where just 1 in 10 voters are closely following news about candidates. Majorities support the water bond and a measure to ease some crime penalties. Fewer than half support Proposition 2, which would establish a budget stabilization account, or also known as a rainy day fund. 6 in 10 Californians continue to say that immigrants are a benefit to the state. Californians continue to be divided on the issue of healthcare reform, and the electorate today is much more upbeat about the state than it was 2 years ago, and much more upbeat than they were 4 years ago when they were going to vote for governor. So at this point, I'm going to invite Dave back up to share some insights that he may have as a old newspaper guy. He always has some really good insights that.
I don't know about the old part. But.
Yeah, well, past job, I should say.
Thank you, Dean. I was an LA Times guy for a long time, and so I kind of look at these numbers and I'm drawn to the election, obviously. And just a couple of quick things before we open it up to questions. I think one of the fascinating things in watching the governor's numbers is that he has, through his whole first term, really struggled with Democratic support. Really, his approval among Democrats has pretty much been in the 60s, the low 60s. Whereas when you look at Obama, when he was higher, he was in the 80s among Democrats. And now at Obama at his lowest and Brown near his highest, they are both at 70, around 70 among Democrats, which is just kind of interesting, unique for two very different politicians, but the same electorate evaluating them. I think Brown's at 72% among Democrats, and Obama's at 70 now. So, and their overall approval rating is not far off either. I mean, Brown is 51 and Obama is 48. So, certainly within the margin of error, and at very different points in terms of the perception of how they're doing. Looking at the propositions, I mean, I think the results for Proposition 2, the Rainy Day Fund, and Proposition 47, the sentencing reform, are kind of stand out as something that is, if not surprising, is something that's interesting and something to wonder what's going on there. Proposition 1, the water bond, obviously there's a drought going on, and you got to wonder, we polled the water bond earlier this year when it was at $11 billion on the ballot, and it polled at about 51% support. So now it's up to about 58, and now that's down to $7 billion. So if you remember, there was a big discussion this past year about how big that bond should be, and the governor really wanted it lower than it was, and it looks like maybe that did make a difference. Proposition 2, the rainy day fund, one thing that's interesting is it's at 43%, but and it's something that, as Dean said, when we asked it a different way and said rainy day fund, it did poll majority support. So when it's called the Budget Stabilization Act, you kind of got to wonder what people are thinking that might be. I also think it's interesting that, I don't know if you saw the state Republican convention this past weekend endorsed Proposition 2. So to have bipartisan support on a fiscal issue in California is not a small thing. And to have it polling, that kind of support, and have it polling at 43% is kind of interesting. So you got to wonder if there's even, when it's that low, you got to wonder at this time whether it's possible to make it pass. But, it's really striking to have that kind of bipartisan support. So maybe there's a message there that can make a difference. And then 47, sentencing reform. This year, if you go back a year, Abel Maldonado was thinking about running against Governor Brown, and he was going to put a proposition on the ballot to repeal the prison realignment that we had. And so going into this year, there was a feeling that public safety was going to be a fairly political and potentially incendiary kind of issue, and then to have a measure on the ballot to reduce sentences for inmates and have it passing at 62% just really stands out. It's pretty striking. So we'll see what happens there. And so with that, we'll open it up to questions.
If you could grab the mic, that way our friends on TV will be able to hear it.
On one of the slides you showed for the healthcare initiative, there were a large percentage of uninsured that are opposed to the healthcare. Were there any indications as to why that was trending that way?
That's not something that we really got into, but I guess there's potentially the feeling that it could make things more difficult, despite the fact that it would be, and someone having to approve any rate increases. And so, but we didn't really have the time. Some of these propositions are longer than others, and so it really eats up a lot of our time in our survey. So unfortunately, we weren't able to dig a little bit deeper into some of those nuances.
Yeah. Bill?
Yeah.
This maybe calls for speculation more than data, so maybe it's one for Dave. With so many people saying that the budget is a big problem, what might they be thinking? Are they still scarred by the previous years when it really was a problem? Or are they conservatives who are never happy when the government is actually raising and spending money? What's the problem that they're worried about?
That's a good question. I don't know exactly the answer. You know, we just went through, the last cycle, we went through Prop 30, and, you know, we saw the difference that made here, but it was about what the problem in the budget was. I don't know. I don't know exactly. It's actually, from where we sit, it's better than it's been, and so it's a good question what people are picking up.
It could be some of the longer term issues as well, like, you know, the pensions and some of the other things that are coming down the road that perhaps they view as, you know, problematic for the future, but the state budget situation as is today, rather, you know, so it could just be the way that they're interpreting that as well.
You know, I just, the other thing that pops in my head is we ask a question a lot of times, is there a lot of waste in government spending? And that number is always really high. It's around 70%. So there's probably some residual overlap there. Yeah, other questions? No? Well, thank you all very much for coming, and hope you enjoyed the survey, and we'll be here if there's anything else. Thank you.